Welcome back, mental magicians. With great power comes great responsibility. You've heard that before from Spider-Man and other sages through the ages. We often mention Kriya Shakti, the power to create. Kriya Shakti is a latent power. It's latent, meaning dormant. It's a thought power in human beings that enables us to produce a visible form from one's thoughts. There is also the extraordinary course here on the Living Theosophy channel on unfolding consciousness, the divine forces in the human being, the awakening of the latent faculties and powers of consciousness, where we investigate perennial philosophies or Theosophy's explanation and investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the powers that are dormant in you. Remember to do no harm, and do not use these to take something that belongs to someone else. Other than that, you can create an amazing life that you choose if you wish to. Now, last week we left off with the directing will. Remember, the directing will. So let's get to it. We're in the underlying force and now the projecting will. So the will still has another important office. It acts as a protector. The willpower that repels the influence or vibrations of another mind and which renders its possessor immune from undesirable thought waves of mentative induction. It creates a protective aura around the individual, that's you, which will turn aside the thought waves or vibrations which may reach you, whether it be sent directly to you or whether they are just vibrations that are emanations from the minds of others and unconsciously sent forth, which happens all the time. The will, when properly used, acts as an insulator for attacks upon the desire pole of one's mind and prevents the vibrations from reaching their mark. And if it be well trained and strengthened, it will also be able to resist the most powerful attacks upon it by the wills of others, and will beat back the vibrations which would force their way into its stronghold to take it captive. Mentative induction. And now let us examine into the subject of the operation of mentative energy when used consciously or unconsciously to affect the minds of others. Now, stay with me. It is true that this subject will be considered in great detail in our further lessons on personal influence and telementation, but it will be well for us, Atkinson says, to take a glance at it here, at the general workings right here at this point. Atkinson covers the points briefly, but the elaboration being made at the proper points. In the first place, let us consider the matter of mentative induction. As you have seen in these lessons, the currents, like electricity, of mentative energy flow in vibratory waves from the minds of the individual, all right, and act upon the minds of others according to the laws of mentative induction. They thus set up corresponding vibrations and therefore mental states or feelings in the minds of such people. In other words, these vibrations induce or set up by induction in the minds of others, the mental states that exist in the mind of the projector, you, what you are projecting. These induced mental states are similar in quality and nature to that of the original mind, but they are in less a degree, as part of the original energy has been dissipated in many directions, and then again, a certain amount of force is lost according to the degree of resistance of the person receiving all of these mentative currents. If the receiving mind sets up consciously or unconsciously a considerable resistance to the vibrations, it will either entirely neutralize them or repel them, or else it will rob them of much of their power. And if, on the contrary, the receiving mind be in its nature more or less in accord with the vibrations, it will set up little to no resistance, and the induced condition will be very nearly as strong as it was in the original impulse. A little thought, if we think about this, he says, it will make sense to you. Mentative currents. Now, the ether, we talk about this in the unfolding consciousness studies. The ether, or a fine substance filling space, is constantly filled with these mentative currents of all kinds and all degrees, streaming out from the minds of all the people. These currents, of course, come in contact with each other and often either combine or else they act to neutralize each other. For instance, currents of a certain degree or a certain kind of vibration of a certain mental state, when they come in contact with other currents of similar vibrations, they will tend to coalesce and combine, there being in harmony and attraction between them. But if they are opposing vibrations, they will antagonize each other and act in the direction of neutralizing each other's force. But if they're both of equal strength, both will lose power. But if one is much stronger than the other, it will lose only the inverse ratio of its strength. Stay with me here. And the weaker will suffer likewise. That is, the weaker will lose twice as much power as the stronger, and the stronger will lose only half as much as the weaker. Supposing that the stronger is of twice the strength of the weaker. We may need to say that again and again as we go through, so just here we go. Mental atmospheres of places. In this way, it is accounted for the well-known fact that places and towns and cities and locations all have their own personal atmospheres. You can feel it, which affect persons living in them or visiting them. These personal atmospheres or towns arise from a combining, neutralizing, etc. of the various vibrations arising from the mentative currents of the minds of the people that are living in this town or location. You can feel this. An average vibration is struck, which is strongly felt by all within the field of induction of that town. A little thought here, Atkinson says, just think about this a little bit. Look around when you're driving around. It'll become clear to you that this is a correct statement of the mental conditions manifest in various cities, towns all over the world. Now, side note here, I've done some videos on Atkinson's teachings and the Theosophical teachings, the description of the atmospheres of bars and places where people go to drink and or use drugs. It is very powerful, and as a recovering addict of 22 years almost, I'm coming up on 22 years, it makes a lot of sense. Makes my heart hurt, actually. But each place has its own individuality, which soon makes an impression on those who live there. It is more than just a geographical location or an atmospheric condition. It is a vibe. It is a vibe, and everybody plays the part in the average mental state of the people living in the town. Now that strikes the keynote there. It's an average of all of the thoughts. The stronger vibrations affect the average and give a mental tone to the place. The best proof of this effect being caused by mental vibrations is found in the fact that two towns, only a few miles away from each other, having the same atmospheric and geographical conditions, manifest entirely different mental atmospheres. Now think about this a little while. He says again, think about this, ponder it, look around, experience it for yourself, and it will become more clear. So the effect of the mentative vibrations, people often ask, if it is true that the ether is filled with mentative currents, why are we not affected more than we are? And Atkinson says here, the answer is that we are affected more than we imagine, but we are still affected much less than one would suppose at first thought, for the reason that the currents conflict with each other and they rob each other of their force. And then again, nature instinctively affords a safeguard and sets up additional powers of resistance. There is so much here. We need to cover the elementals and all of that, but just listen. Just as nature protects the hearing sense of those who are surrounded with many noises until they fail to hear really anything, it all fades into the background. Just as nature operates upon the smelling sense of the chemist who fails to notice the massive smells which are very apparent to anybody going into a shop, so does nature give an additional unconscious resisting power to people who are situated with an active field of mentative induction. This affects you. It affects me. Being a person from a quiet place and going into a bustling, active city, and then you're either swept off your feet at first with all of the excitement and the vibration, or you could actually feel completely overwhelmed and absolute, like, I can't hang. This is not okay. I am repelled by reason of the inharmonious and mentative currents. They're there. That's what you're feeling. In either case, however, you will be intensely aware of the vibes. He says vibrations, but the vibes. But the same man, after a time, will fail to be so affected. He'll be better able to resist the vibe and will manage to live with greater peace and poise than at first, although he will, of course, alter his nature more or less to be in harmony with the prevailing tone of this place. He will feel and sense the vibrations less as time goes on. Some people have developed this resisting power until they are almost completely immune, while others who have very little power of resistance, that they are swept here and there and carried away, and they don't really have the control that they would like in their lives. So the mentative energy that reaches them, they're always in some field of induction and being swayed by its vibrations. I know that as I go through these teachings, I get a little bit better at some of this. I am not perfect by any means. So, side note from me here, I believe in the world of today, this would also apply to where we spend our time when we are online, not just cities and towns, as Atkinson was writing about, but the online groups that we spend our time. I'm just saying. Now, waves of feeling, he continues. This phase of mentative induction explains the phenomena on those great waves of feeling that sweep over a country, like the emotion that followed 9/11, or if you're old enough, when Kennedy was shot and killed. People will remember the first shock that came, and then they're watching the news, they're reading the newspaper, and then there's this growing sense of some impending event of great moment, mingled with fear and horror and indignation, followed by an almost irresistible desire to join in a movement to avenge the outrage. That's how we're all feeling. Our feelings are all mixing together. This latter feeling grew perceptibly as wave after wave of feeling passed over the country in mentative currents, setting up increased mental feeling by induction. Now, older people will remember many similar waves that swept over the land in past days, and remember what happened. We were all swept up together in the same feeling. Next week, we move on to mentative cyclones, and I know I tell you this all the time, but with the secret and all of the sea of Get Your Ex Back, please, these law of attraction videos are there. I remind you, please, that I am sharing these teachings with you, trusting that you're going to use these abilities responsibly and to the benefit of all beings, not just yourself. All right? Do no harm and do not take something that belongs to someone else. You will learn this either through what I'm saying, by taking my advice, or you'll learn the hard way. The brain can transform energy into physical substances and states. Each week we read through this. This is Mental Magic, written down by William Walker Atkinson. And if you missed the earlier videos, there's a playlist. The first few of them, I'm kind of finding my feet. I might make a secondary playlist for you. And also on the unfolding consciousness studies, we're now kicking those back to maybe 1 or 2 a month. We were doing them weekly, but we are covering the latent abilities in mankind. Another recent event that would cover this wave of mentative current covering a globe would be the death of the Queen and those beautiful rainbows that appeared over London. We were all thinking about that time and space and our relationship with this woman who was a constant. For so many years, she was queen, living for most of all of our memories. We're all focusing on that time and space. And I remember when I saw those rainbows, I thought, that's all this mentative energy. But I called it something else. It was just the vibe of love that was shooting towards that space on Earth at the same time. I love you, and I appreciate you being here, and I will see you next week.